Welcome to video lecture 6 in our course on St. Thomas Aquinas' teaching on his metaphysical teaching about the one and the many. Today we're going to examine the problem of the one and the many and its relationship to the nature of philosophy and science in relationship to several other notions dealing with virtual quantity, opposites, privations, necessity, possession, and this follows on our previous discussion in Lecture 5 related to the proper way to divide a genus into species and how the way a genus is divided into species, we find specific differences, is essentially connected to the way we're going to understand the division of speculative sciences, as well as we could also say the division of practical and productive sciences, and in relationship to what technical jargon means, how we properly talk, or what predication is in sciences and in philosophy, especially what analogy means. In last class, I went over 7 topics related to that issue of predication and analogy and dividing the genus into species properly, the way St. Thomas considers it from a philosophical standpoint, and also from a standpoint in reality, where we're talking about causes here. We're talking about organizational causes, and we're talking about operational causes. The operational cause essentially depending upon the existence of an organizational cause, of a being having its own unity, so that it can operate as a unit. And in one of the topics, the first of those topics that I talked about, there were 7 of them, so I'm going to have to look down at notes to recall some of them I talked about. But the first of them dealt with the fact that, according to St. Thomas, we divide a genus into species on the basis of extremes of possession and privation that become the opposite extremes belonging to a common subject or common principle or common cause. This common cause that is engaged in its self-development through this initial generation of opposite extremes is of possession and privation is also Aristotle's notion of substance. He thinks that coming up with this notion that there is a common principle or a common cause of extremes of privation and possession is the origin of his understanding of substance, as well as of contrary opposition, because contrary opposites are extreme differences of possession and privation existing within and generated by a common subject. It's only within that genus that you can have differences and samenesses, strictly speaking. The same and the different, in some way or other, agree in unequally distributing a common subject. So for 2 things to be the same, or for 2 things to be different, they have to have some kind of unity of substance. That unity of substance is also expressed in terms of qualitative unity and quantitative unity, analogously, and that will lead to the fact that Aristotle divides speculative sciences into 3, because the equal, right, and the similar and the same simply mean that which is in some way one. So that which is one in substance, substance being considered what we would normally consider to be a substantial being, as well as a quantified being or a qualified being, have intrinsic principles of unity that make them knowable as subjects of science, because science deals with, engages in talk, predicates, uses talk that expresses a necessary connection, an unbreakability that exists between causes and effects. So demonstration for Aristotle is necessarily per se demonstration. But it's not the kind of per se demonstration that logicians talk about. It's a kind of demonstration in which an essential connection, an essential relationship is being established between an effect and its cause, and the operational activities that cooperate to generate this cause, this effect, in relationship to a chief and common aim. So Aristotle will also call this chief subject, this substance, a common matter. And he'll say that when you properly define the subject of a science, you have to include within it its matter. So that even the mathematician has to include in mathematical definitions some reference to matter. Not the sensible matter that the physicist will have to include, like qualitative differences and differences in relationship to motion that result from that, but dimensive kind of matter. The geometrician might not be concerned about the fact that the surface being studied has a specific color, but it does have to have dimensions, and the dimensions have to be referenced in the definition being given by the geometrician. So and necessity for Aristotle means that something has in it, contains in it a unity, that a thing can only be in one way. It cannot be in more than one way. Aristotle's notion of unity is essentially connected. He derives it. He thinks it's derived in some way from an understanding of being deprived of multiplicity, being deprived of divisibility, being deprived of being able to be broken apart, and as a result, unity is a cause. The unitary cause in a thing is its form. It chiefly prevents the thing from being broken apart. And so an easier term for us to use today might be simply unitary cause when talking about form, because it makes it a little bit more intelligible to us today, when we won't primarily think of it or chiefly think of it in terms of shape. But anyway, I'm going to look down to see some of the other questions we went over the other day, so that I can deal with them quickly and get into the four topics of discussion for today, which I'll try to cover just the first two in this 30-minute or so lecture, because this review will take a little bit of time, but I want to go over it so that you have a good grasp of what we did the other day. According to Aristotle, I've gone over the first two that we talked about the other day. The third one is, and I didn't mention too much, if at all, the other day, was why all divisions of philosophy, not just metaphysics, deal with per se predication and the proximate subject of philosophical study and predication, about which philosophers chiefly talk. Sometimes people talk about metaphysics dealing with first principles as if other divisions of philosophy don't do this as well. All divisions of philosophy deal with first principles, and all deal with talk that, and this is philosophy and science again being identical. all divisions of science involve in some way, at some point, being able to express a necessary condition, a necessary connection, an essential connection between effects and causes. If we never establish that in the reasoning process that we're going through, we've never achieved science. That doesn't mean throughout the entire process that we're always doing this, but at some point in the process, in our reasoning, as we stumble along and make mistakes, we get increasingly more precise understanding and come to an understanding of the cause for the apparent contradictions and inexplicable behavior that we're wondering about in things. So it's not simply metaphysics that deals with first principles. All of the philosophical scientific disciplines do, and all use necessary predication. They talk about all and every and why something must be so. And this is to express things, according to Aristotle, in terms of a relation to unity, that the predication is always in some way an expression of the way a multitude is understood to be one, how two things are one, and not many, or not divided, or are divided, that this cannot be that. The precise nature of the scientists, philosophers' subject of predication, right? And the way that essentially deals from the logicians, I went over in detail the other day, so I'm not going to talk about it here. That once again, we're talking about an operational subject and not one that is abstracting from operational causes when we're talking philosophically or scientifically. How formally different common matters and these two intrinsic accidents of quantity and quality influenced Aristotle's division of theoretical philosophy. Completely to understand why he divided the sciences into or philosophical divisions in speculative philosophy into three, we have to understand that he did this not only on the basis of the forms, like Boethius thought, or the kind of unity in things, but also on the basis of this necessary unbreakability in things, but also because of the kind of mental activity, the habit of knowing, right, which is involved in these, and the focus of attention on the possession of a habit that can apprehend the qualitative aspects of the thing and the quantitative aspects and the underlying substantial principles in which those other principles are subjectified. So the division of what makes the sciences scientific is the fact that they're studying these necessary and one beings, the beings that have a kind of necessary relationship in them, causal relationship, and they are speculative because of the fact that we're chiefly aiming at examining them from a habit of mind which simply wants to understand that constitution that this thing has, its organization, rather than to understand that organization for the purpose, say, of manufacturing or engaging in some sort of service activity. The sixth question we went over is here again I did not talk about this in any detail. In fact, I mentioned that metaphysics studies immaterial beings, but since immaterial beings have no matter, right, and the genus that a science or philosophy studies is, the subject it studies is a genus, how could you say that it studies immaterial beings? Well, it does so analogously, as St. Thomas thinks. Because it's considering St. Thomas is talking about matter like we talk about subject or subject matter today. Huh? And this fluid use of the term in medieval scholasticism, which was not a philosophy but a way of talking in the schools among the professionals, it's very fluid. So strictly speaking, that's correct. It's immaterial beings should not be considered to be possessed of matter, but they are a common subject, common matter in that sense, inasmuch as they constitute principles, causes that have different hierarchies of possession and privation that extend immaterial ways of being throughout this hierarchy. Finally, I talked about this crucial distinction between the way in which logicians and philosophers, scientists talk about substance, because for Aristotle, a mathematical body, a quantified body, a dimensive body, is a substance. And so science studies accidents for Aristotle. Not only does it study accidents, Aristotle claims that science studies individuals. That we have scientific knowledge of individuals as well as of universals. That is, universal relations. Because you can't have the universal relation except inasmuch as the cause that is existing in a thing has a universal relation to a multitude. Like the example of the sun heating a multitude of things is a cause. It's got a universal relation to the things it causes. And that reference to the sun makes me think about something I went over today that can get students of St. Thomas confused at times when he says that the maximum in any genus is the measure of whatever is contained in the genus, everything that is in the genus. And he gives the example of the sun being that which is most hot, being the cause of everything, or the measure of everything that is hot. Now, what St. Thomas has in mind or is thinking of there is something like health. Healthy bodies. You're talking about the healthy body, the relatively healthy body, as the genus. And health, strictly speaking, is in the physical body. Right? That's where it's chiefly located. So you can talk about the maximum in a genus in several different ways, analogously. And in one way, it's that which is the maximum in the genus, right? Being that subject in which health is chiefly located, not in exercise or medicine or food, even though analogously we can talk about these. So unless you have that chief subject of reference, of communication, then you can't, strictly speaking, say that health is being understood or being caused properly. You can't properly talk about other things being health-related if there is no health as a form or a unitary cause in a chief subject that possesses it. If nothing, strictly speaking, possesses it at all or possesses it in a maximum degree, then this analogous talk is unintelligible. And in our own day, we wouldn't talk about the sun as being that which is the maximum in heat, or we might talk about a electrified, some sort of an electromagnetic activity as being the maximum in the genus, and wherever you find the heat, you are going to find that possessed in varying degrees. And wherever you find it possessed in varying degrees, if you find it in individuals in varying degrees, well, that's because of sharing a specific difference, that would serve as a common matter for these individuals, a common principle. And in different kinds of things, like the heat in a light bulb, for example, being caused by electrical activity, or the heating of a gas, if you consider the sun to be electrified gas, then or electromagnetically activated gas. You could also consider the maximum of the genus to be the being that's engaged in the knowing, like the angelic nature that possesses the highest power of knowing, or the maximum in the genus of vision, being the person who sees best, as well as the colored thing, the being that has color, or in the case of knowing, the thing that is known. Both of them, in a way, are the maximum in the genus. So that this notion can be somewhat confusing. But the point St. Thomas is trying to get at is that if you don't have a maximum in a genus, even if human beings didn't exist and you only had animals, say, some animal nature is going to be the maximum in the genus. And it's in relationship to that maximum in the genus where you find health, that health is going to be predicated of other kinds of beings, or even animal is going to be predicated of other kinds of beings. So it acts as the kind of a center for a communications network, and which is, in a sense, is what a substance is in modern jargon. Once again, to give an analogy, just like it's an organization, it's a communications network. John Deely calls it a semiotic web, and I think that's a pretty good description of what a substance is for Aristotle, as well as what a genus is. It's a kind of web of signs that ultimately points to a singular subject in which causal activity and causal relations are occurring. Okay, so having reviewed that, to some extent, I've touched on some of the topics that we're going to talk about today. And I hope I've covered any things that might have been missing from the other lecture, and made clearer to you what I was talking about the other day. Now I want to talk about, and I mentioned this, St. Thomas is teaching about virtual quantity, opposition, first principles, privation, possession, and necessity, and how these relate to the problem of the one and the many, and the problem of the one and the many being the subject of philosophy and science. And I want to do this first by talking about this notion of virtual quantity, opposites, and first principles, and how these are crucial to understanding St. Thomas's teaching about the nature of philosophy and science. It's in light of St. Thomas and Aristotle distinguish between two types of quantity, virtual and dimensive. Right? Now, most students of St. Thomas are not aware of this. They think that he distinguished between continuous quantity and discrete. But he makes a more primitive distinction between virtual quantity and dimensive quantity. And that distinction is crucial to understand his principle of unity, right? And the way unity is divided. Because science studies a substance as a principle of per se accidents, of accidents that are properties that are essentially possessed by a substance, through which the activities of a substance become known. Right? And these essential accidents account for the possession of unity, the distribution of unity, the unequal distribution of unity throughout a multitude. So, virtual quantity, according to St. Thomas, is actually a type of quality. Forms are qualities for St. Thomas. And they refer to receptive capacities for an act. Like the form of a thing is a receptive capacity for the act of existence, but it's limited. St. Thomas is talking about immaterial greatness when he's talking about virtual quantity. I related it the other day to the concentration of a liquid, which gives it to it a greatness of strength or greatness of power. Well, there's greatness of strength or greatness of power in possessing an act in a unified and simple way, in a less composite fashion, right? Is what St. Thomas is talking about, and how this greater concentration of power within a material gives to it an influence, a strength of operating in relationship to things around it that lesser beings don't have, and so those lesser beings will be more dependent upon circumstances and conditions external to it to perform actions that a more powerful being in virtual quantity can perform without those external aids. Just like a person with better sight doesn't need glasses, like I do, but a person with weaker sight. So that has to do with the virtual quantitative power. Now, a genus is divided by the virtual quantitative power, the virtual quantum power of reception within a receiving subject, a potency, a determinate potency. And it's at the foundation of the scholastic principle that you might have heard of, that everything which is received into a receiver according to the capacity of the receiver. Right? That not everything is able in this universe of ours to act on other things, so that these other things necessarily are receptive to being influenced. The existence of everything in some way or other is going to influence the existence of everything else. But there are limits to the influence that one being can have on another, like materials that are rubber and electricity, or things that are flammable, materials that resist being able to be inflamed. Like asbestos products, a good example. And once again, I pointed out how for Galileo noticed these properties of resistance and receptivity, which I suspect he came across in reading Aristotle and probably reading St. Thomas, because he was in contact with Jesuits at the Collegio Romano and was familiar with the teaching of Aristotle and St. Thomas, and respected both, and actually wanted his own teaching to be a continuation of that Aristotelian and I think Thomistic tradition. Anyway, every science then considers virtual quantity, right? And in considering species. And it has to consider opposites because it's this virtual quantitative extremes that cause the existence of contrary opposition. Now, it might appear, right, that Aristotle, right, contradicted himself in saying that we first get our idea of unity, right, by he claims that we do this, that this concept of unity includes an implied privation. That is, if privation does not have some kind of reality to it, right, then there is no real unity, and our awareness of unity we can't really comprehend, because Aristotle maintained we don't arrive at this notion of unity from mathematics, but and I've mentioned this before, but we arrive at it on the sense level. And so he doesn't contradict himself, because many people think, well, the idea of unity is something positive. which is in a way true, but we don't arrive at it that way. We arrive at our understanding of all of these transcendental beings, notions, negatively, through privative negation, through negative relations that are involved in the act of abstraction that we're performing. And to give you an idea what Aristotle meant was this: when we first sense something, we sense it generically. Even the notion of being, which St. Thomas says falls into the intellect, ens, E-N-S in Latin, we first apprehend this negatively and conflatedly. That is, from composition. Right? Our first experience of a being is as a something that we are sensing, and this generic sensation, and it's generic because we sense with our intellects as well as with our external sense faculties. First, with the sense of touch, and then growing out of the sense of touch, other sense faculties. So our first awareness of ourselves and of the thing which we know is conflated. We don't really make a separation that precisely between ourselves and the things which we know, or the something which we know. And what first falls into our intellect is something from which we become divided, and it's experienced. Our first experience of substance is of an existing, qualified, quantified being, in which we don't clearly distinguish among those notions. In all likelihood, this is why the ancient Greeks considered the sense world to be chaos in some way. Our first awareness is of this. Conflated unity, and according to Aristotle, it's on the basis of our awareness of a body being a continuum and it being able to be broken that we recognize the understanding of unity. That it's the fact that in this sense world, which we chiefly recognize as somehow pluralized, there's something contained within it that can't be broken. And that idea of breakability or unbreakability is qualitative. So our idea of unity is actually connected first with quality, with having the quality and of not being able to be broken and in some way to remain a continuum. It's complicated, but this explains why the opposite of unity for Aristotle is not number, and why unity for the ancient Greeks is not a number, but the opposite of unity as a principle of being, or of politics, or of health, or of economics, and so on, is not, strictly speaking, number, but pluralization. You become in some way pluralized, or you become politically divided, or your health would be politically fragmented, broken apart. And Aristotle is not contradicting himself when he says that we arrive at this understanding of unity on the basis of privation. And this is important because privation then becomes an essential element for our being able to comprehend the notion of unity. And if we comprehend everything in terms of unity, know things in the relationship to unity, to deny the reality of privation will cause tremendous difficulties in your understanding of science, because you won't understand the notion of resistance and receptivity. Privation is not simply the absence of something in something. It's a resistance within things to the reception of a kind of unity and a kind of activity. And as well as a receptivity, and so it's contained within the virtual quantum greatness of a thing. So if you don't understand what virtual quantity is, you can't understand the division of a genus into a species, and you won't understand the notion of unity, and you can't possibly understand what science is. This is one of the reasons why I say the contemporary understanding of science cannot possibly be correct, if there is a contemporary understanding of science, which I seriously doubt, nor can a contemporary understanding of philosophy be right. But let me leave off there. I'm back for this second class lecture, video lecture, for lecture 6, in which I've been talking about the notion of virtual quantity and privation and possession and necessity, and several other topics related to the connection between the problem of the one and the many and science and philosophy for St. Thomas. And I also talked about how Aristotle did not contradict himself by saying that we grasp the notion of unity on the sense level by in some way grasping an implied privation. I have 2 more topics that I want to talk to you about in relationship to this. And it has to do with, and to some extent, the way we talk in science and in philosophy, and the division of the sciences, the speculative sciences, and the terms same, different, equal, unequal, similar, and dissimilar. Because all of these in some way express, according to Aristotle and St. Thomas, ways in which something is one. And in doing so, they're expressing ways in which a substance, a qualified or quantified, or just a substance as considered as substance, can be broken apart and held together, unified, causes of resistance and receptivity. So the way we talk about opposition, receptivity and resistance to being broken apart in different regarding different subjects of scientific study is in relationship to these terms. So the way a metaphysician talks about them, strictly speaking, is in terms of sameness and difference, and mathematicians do so in terms of equality and inequality. In ordinary day experience, the common use of the term similarity, similar, dissimilar, like, unlike. And the fact that we use analogy as the chief way of talking in our everyday lives, as well as in philosophy and science, is one of the reasons why, even though these are kind of strict terms for the division of these sciences considered from a metaphysical standpoint, in everyday speech we mix them up, and we'll talk about a political equality, for example. We'll extend the notion of analogously of a mathematical term, one that we, strictly speaking, are using in relationship to dimensive beings and to arithmetical and geometrical relationships. But Aristotle noticed how this concept of unity, by means of which we make everything intelligible to ourselves, we understand everything in some way by making it definite, by considering it as in some way definite, as separated from a multitude, and it becomes an indivisible intelligible, as St. Thomas sometimes talks about it. That is, until we can identify a subject as an indivisible, intelligible, separate from a multitude, we don't have a determinate understanding of it. It's not definite for us. But we make things definite according to different ways of considering unity. And we have different habits of mind that enable us to do that. Because we derive the idea of unity from the notion of privation, not being able to be broken apart in substance, Aristotle maintains, and this is a principle of being, becoming, and knowing, Aristotle maintains that the notions of sameness, similarity, equality are also privations. They derived in the same way we derive the understanding of unity. He calls them secondary privations, and this way of talking can get people confused. So it's good to understand why he's doing that. And their opposites are also privations. They're privations of their opposites. So inequality, dissimilarity, difference are also privations. They're privations of unity, and they're inclinations to break apart. Once again, the unity is a kind of receptivity to unity. Unity is a kind of resistance to being broken apart, and a receptivity not to be broken apart. Okay, so when we're talking about privation once again and possession, we're talking about receptivity and resistance, and the division within a genus or an organization, right, is based upon receptivity and resistance. Now, the reason this is important to go over and to consider, one of them, is because predication, the way we talk, is always connected to referring relationships of unity being one or not being one. And science deals with contrary oppositions. That a contrary opposite, Aristotle realized, is a kind of opposition that exists as a kind of midpoint between total possession, perfect possession of unity, in which case only one being would exist, right? And a total negation of unity, a contradictory opposite, so that if one thing exists, another can't. Huh? And science deals with that multitude of beings in between contradictory opposites and total and perfect possession. So when we're studying the healthy body, we're not talking about the body that in no way is subject to disease, or when we're engaged in a science like politics. When we're studying peace, we're not engaged in a study of a subject where we're not in any way considering war. It's the relatively healthy body, the somewhat deprived. So the perfectly possessed species within a genus is the one that's most healthy, and the most deprived is the one that's least healthy. You could consider privation as a kind of imperfect possession, right? And imperfect possession, right, requires resistance as well as receptivity. That's why these notions of resistance and receptivity are crucial to understanding the nature of a genus, the nature of an organization, and also the nature of the way we talk. Because the sameness and difference are expressions of sharing a common unity, the common unity being the common matter, or in the case of immaterial beings, the common principle. Right? So when St. Thomas is talking about matter, he's basically talking about that is a common matter. He's talking about a common principle. Right? The term matter is really something that, to some extent, could be dispensed with in his way of speaking. And it can lead you to all sorts of confusions if you get too focused on it. But now these 6 oppositions, right, are the foundation for all relationships, all real relationships as well as fictional relationships. But contradictory opposites have no relationship. You know? They're totally unrelated. And a being that's totally perfect is totally unrelated. In between, we have all of the relationships to which speech refers. So if you don't understand the relationships and the proper language of relationship, right, in which you talk, that qualitative relationships, for example, share some sort of a quality in common, unequally possess a quality. Quantitative relationships, in some way, are unequally sharing some sort of a quantified being, and substantial relationships are unequally sharing some sort of substantial being. One in substance, one in quantity, one in quality. This is the foundational talk for all science. So all science must express its understanding of its activity in terms of these words. All intelligible speech in all of the sciences depend upon these oppositions. In all philosophy depend upon these oppositions. You cannot get rid of them. Huh? So to talk about contradiction as a principle of philosophy or science is absurd. It absolutely makes no sense. This is why to take someone like Hegel seriously and to see all progress depending upon contradiction, when understood in the proper sense of contradiction, where it totally negates the existence of something else, makes action impossible. And Aristotle realized that activity in the universe is the result of a relationship that exists in some way, a unity that can be established between opposites, and like the form and the matter in a thing. Unless you can join the opposites together in some way, like I gave the example of, take the example of something like burning a piece of wood. You have to qualify it first, right? In order so that it can be inflamed and can become part of the same genus, right, as what is doing the inflaming. The knower and the thing known. The knower has to have the proper qualities to be able to apprehend the thing known. Proper qualification is a necessary condition for the reception of activity and the performance of activity. So, if the quality of your foot is not suitable to walk on the quality of this surface, the act of walking is not going to occur. So activity for Aristotle is always a coincidence of opposites, and is the result of movement and succession, of imperfect possession of an act, so that it's always the movement of one contrary to another. You're getting from going younger to getting older. You're going from being less intelligent to more intelligent to less intelligent, heavier to thinner, warmer to colder, and so on. All activity, all motion is a movement from one opposite to another, or a midpoint between the opposites to one or other of the opposites. Aristotle's teaching on action, his teaching on causality, is unintelligible apart from his teaching on opposition. And since philosophy, science, is concerned with the causes of effects, it's got to be concerned always in some way with action. Action that is either generating an organizational unity or action that is generating some sort of a subsequent operation as a result of this. And wherever an action exists, there has to be some sort of a relationship that has been established by the proper qualities, by the coincidence of the qualities. So to deny the reality of privation, to deny the reality of virtual quantity, which, by the way, today we would probably use the phrase or the term conductive capacity, right? Or conductibility, right? That each physical thing has a certain conductive capacity or conductibility to it, by means of which it can distribute an act. To deny the reality of that principle, and Aristotle refers to this as a principle, the principle of privation. This is one of the reasons why, if you misunderstand the nature of principle and you think it refers to a premise chiefly, you'll never understand what Aristotle or St. Thomas is talking about. This principle of privation is connected to the principle of virtual quantity or conductive capacity, and that's the foundation for our understanding of relationships. Deny the reality of privation, you deny the reality of relationships, or limit the reality of privation. You limit the reality of relationships. Limit the reality of relationships, you limit the reality of actions. Right? You get into the area of moral choice, this becomes very important to understand, because whenever you choose something, you're actually not choosing a thing, you're choosing an action and a relationship to a thing. The thing becomes the enabling means. For example, you never can choose. I've often told my students in class on campus this. It's impossible for anybody to choose a house or an automobile or a pair of skis or anything like this. What you choose is a relationship to these things and an action that is executed through the relationship. You choose to wear some skis or to buy a house or to drive a car. So you're always choosing human activity. That's the only thing capable. Human beings are capable of changing. The only being we're capable of choosing. Right? And so the instrument can only be chosen in as much as it's relatable to the human activity. That's the only thing that you can desire. And in relationship to the activity, you can desire the formal object that motivates the activity. This is why, with respect to a genus, there always has to be a higher species through which communication to the originator of the aim within the genus exists. To give an example, in the faculty of sight, right, which is also an intellectual activity, the facultative power that exists in the organ of sight has to be activated by color. You get rid of the formal object, a formal object being that which activates a faculty or a power or a habit. In a sense, even plants have formal objects, like the sun, of opening the petals on a flower. The faculty has a natural inclination to be in contact with its cause, and to manifest the likeness of its cause through an inclination, through an internal inclination. So the faculty of sight never wants to lose connection with color. But the physical power, the organ, is not capable of enabling that continuous exercise of sight. So we need rest in order to be able to continue it. Well, the same thing is true with respect to any organization. There is a chief part that is in communication, chief communication with the formal object, and maintenance of connection with the formal object. When stimulated externally, it generates an inclination to act in a certain way. So when you're stimulated by color in the faculty of sight, you see. That's the aim. The formal object, that being outside of you, that can activate this faculty, that this faculty is proportionately related to, by virtue of virtual quantity, to react to, that faculty seeks to perform an action by means of which it maintains this unity with its efficient cause, with what is embedding in it its activity, and so long as it maintains that aim, holds on to that aim, it can recover to some extent, maintain the communication with its formal object that it never seeks to lose. And this is what motivates people to develop sciences and philosophy, divisions of philosophy, because we seek to maintain a union with the formal object that satisfies human nature and makes human beings happy. And that's one of the reasons why Aristotle thought that an unmoved mover had to exist to explain the changes that occur in this physical universe of ours, because this opposition that goes on within us is not naturally united. That is, it's naturally unitable, but not opposites don't tend to be united. But they're united in organizations precisely because these organizations have belong to these parts of this organization belong to a whole that is being externally stimulated and by a cause to which these parts want to maintain union, so that they can maintain their own unity and maintain this organization and exercise their activity. So once the aim is destroyed, the union with the formal object is destroyed, and the parts no longer cease to be parts of this whole. The organization becomes destroyed. This. Once again, none of this is very complicated. I'll go back over it, and if you remember the very simple examples, the glaring example, in which you find, in a sense, the maximum of the genus, the measure, the cause, right, of intelligibility more than anywhere else. And if you can't find it there, you're not going to be able to find it anywhere. So these analogies, going back to simple examples, is something that I'm going to do on a repeated basis. And I'll go over this. I'll review this the next class, which will be video lecture 7, and it will become hopefully increasingly intelligible to you, as it will by reading over the transcript and reading the selections that I've given you from St. Thomas and from Aristotle and some from Plato. So